Welcome to my show. It's a guest here. Her name is Kayla Crane. Mrs. Kayla, how are you doing, ma?
I'm good, thanks. It's thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Kayla. Firstly, you are a licensed marriage and family therapist. Can you please, Mrs. Kayla, discuss more about yourself and how you are doing currently now, Kayla?
Yeah, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, like you said. I specialize in couples and relationships as well as trauma. So I often combine the two and do some relational trauma work.
That's very, very inspiring. Thank you so much for the insight, Mrs. Kayla. And from your experience when it comes to a lot of relationship and from your experience as a licensed marriage and family therapist, have you written any book or are you personally planning to write any book in the coming future, Mrs. Kayla?
Um, I don't think so, but
Okay.
never know.
Exactly. We don't know what tomorrow will say. Definitely.
Exactly. Yes.
Anything could happen in the coming future. I would like to dive to the point of communication.
Yeah.
Communication is one of the most important thing when it comes to probably relationship, even in friendship. If there is no communication, there is no connection. So I would like to dive to that point of communication. What do you think are the most common mistake? Because there will definitely be mistake when it comes to communications. Couples makes most of the time, Mrs. Kayla.
Yeah. Um, so I would say the most common mistakes would be the one that I see most common is couples arguing about who's right and who's wrong. You're not going to get anywhere with that. That's not productive. You've got to go to the feeling of the situation. Um, because if you're trying to convince your partner they're wrong and you're right, you're probably not going to be able to. And then it's just going to kind of go back and forth. If you can take that piece out and not focus on who's wrong and right, and just kind of focus on, well, that incident made me feel lonely, or however it made you feel, and your partner addresses that rather than the right and wrong.
I think that's very, very important because everybody just want to be right. Everyone, the partner want this one want to be right. This one also want to be right. I think that's what used to cause the unusual communication that could cause serious escalation. And there will also be way, you said it that there are also ways the person will respond so that to make that communication work. I also opt like to ask if there are also different ways that conversation can come on and off without escalation or without hurting each other by the end, Miss Kayla.
Yeah. So one of the most important tools I think in couples therapy is taking a break or taking a time out, because we're all going to get dysregulated, and our partner is going to make us mad, and that's just how it's going to be sometimes. And so instead of planning on that never happening or hoping that will never happen, just plan for it, right? And that's when things are when one or both partners is kind of um they're dysregulated, then someone calls a timeout. The important part of a timeout, though, is you set a time that you'll be taking the timeout, and you come back at that time. And that's like the critical piece. Otherwise, it feels like one partner might feel like we're never going to come back to this. We're never going to fix this. So I think that use that time during the timeout to get regulated, to do whatever you have to do. If you have to journal or exercise or take a nap or talk to a friend or meditate, use that time and then come back and try the conversation again.
That's very, very important. Giving that time, giving that space will definitely help in bringing up a meaningful conversation that will not hurt in the point, because when the body is hot, like when the body is boiling, it's not going to be easy with the conversation. So just give that time, give that space. I think that's very, very important. And Mrs. Kayla, they used to say differences. There was even a time when I heard that differences, if one doesn't have the same differences, one should not just go into a relationship. They say the introvert and the extrovert, stuff like that. Those type of differences. So how do you think one can handle communication in those type of different differences? It's not going to be easy. One might be really I am loud and one might be really low. Those things really happens. So how do you think one can handle such type of communication differences? And how do you think listening is very powerful in communication, Mrs. Kayla?
Yeah. Well, I look at those things as complementary. That's what I tell clients. When they're very different, that's actually good. They can balance each other out instead of looking at it from a perspective that we're so different it won't work. It's actually you can make it work, right? That's a good balance because if both people were, one way, then there might not be a balance with that. So I think that that's just using that to your advantage and keeping in mind, I think that perspective changes a lot, just thinking about it differently, instead of when there's conflict saying, okay, it's because we're not the same, right? How can we use our different strengths to improve our relationship, to get each other's needs met? Yeah.
Thank you so much for the insight. That means differences is even very important. Like it really makes the relationship even probably more interesting. It's just the
Yeah.
way one can build it on and on and on. So I think that's what make people understand that you different does not mean anything. It even
Yeah.
brings the type of normal, deeper connection. Just try. It could take years of him because it's not easy. It's going to take time to develop that connection and develop that understanding. But when it has happened, it lasts forever. Honestly speaking. So I would like to dive to the point of communication. I do not know. I've not gotten to that point, so I do not know. You might have gotten that experience as a mother. Like children, when children comes into the matter, I do not know if communication changes. Probably with your experience, you will know that when children come into the place, probably maybe communication do change. Do you feel like, when children come into the place, when children start to come into the family, stuff like that, do you feel like communication within the husband and wife really changes? And how can one just, manage that, Mrs. Kale?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it changes everything, right? Having a baby. And so you do need to learn how to, it's such a stressor, right? And so I think it's really important when there is a really big stressor for each partner to be able to take care of themselves. I know that's hard with a newborn, right? But if you can make a little bit of time for each other to, take care of themselves. And I think that relieves a little bit of the stress and that allows for them to use the tools that they've learned already, right? And so that's, I think, also important to have that solid foundation, have those tools down. Um, and so to have those tools kind of already at hand, and then when you have enough self-care and you're able to, again, stay regulated, then you're able to access those tools. And once again, when you're recognizing your partner is overwhelmed, because everyone's going to get overwhelmed, particularly when there's a baby, work as a team. And so I think that that's the most important part, being able to, you really have to have those strong foundation and where you're able to ask your partner for help and have it not be a fight or an argument, right? Which happens a lot. And so, if before the baby comes, you're able to develop a way that you can ask for help in a appropriate way where your partner doesn't get defensive, then I think that's important. So I think, developing that solid foundation before the baby arrives.
Oh, that's really, really important. Honestly speaking, Mrs. Scaler, very,
Yeah.
very important. That means one must have to develop that communication before that baby arrives. When that baby
Mm.
arrives and the communication is not yet fertile, there will be issues. Because
Yeah.
some people might the other side might be defensive, the other side might over exaggerate, and it could escalate. So
Mhm.
building that communication before the baby is very, very important. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that, Mrs. Kayla. Thank you so much for that. And I would also like to go to couples who love to, I know, I do not know, but if I'm correct, women are the one that used to be more of defensive when it comes to communication or stuff like that. I don't know. I may be wrong, but defensiveness cause a lot of, it doesn't make the communication to flow because there's still something in there that hasn't come out. And if that thing has not come out, whether that person like it or not, that relationship is still going to be having some ups and downs. So I do not know, a lot of things could cause that defensiveness. Some people could say their past relationship, some is what they experienced from the past. A lot of things cause those defensiveness too. But how do you think couples can improve in that situation? Defensiveness is very important. How do you think they can improve in this defensiveness and improve that emotional connection and communication? Open up, let's speak, and let's just bring everything out so that the relationship become much stronger. How do you think they can go about it, Mrs. Kayla?
So defensiveness is actually uh, usually it's a trauma response. And so, for example, if people we all have like these negative core wounds that live inside of us, and for some people it's feeling um fear of abandonment or fear of failure, fear of worthlessness, fear of disappointing others, abandonment, all kinds of things. So if a partner has the that core wound of uh fear of worthlessness, and somebody and their partner says or criticizes them and says, um you did something wrong, and that partner, if a lot of times if they have that fear of worthlessness or that deep down belief that they're worthless, when their partner says they've done something wrong, that's what they're
The brain.
probably not cognitively think, or they're not thinking of it, but really that's what it's touching on. And so that partner, since they live with that worthlessness, they don't want their partner to think of them like that. And so they get defensive. They say, no, 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 that didn't happen. And so they're trying to make sure, and they're trying to tell their partner, I'm not worthless. Right. And that without doing the work, a lot of times people don't have that language or even that insight. But once you do, right, you can either say that, or like when I work with couples, I'll try to get them to recognize it. And sometimes they don't. And then if their partner picks up on them being defensive, they can maybe say, hey, are you maybe feeling worthless right now? Um, because it's connected to something more.
That is a very massive one because hey, I don't know how that one can be solved because it's something that has been without before the person even met that person. That is what has, occurred. So it's flashbacks. It's something that just flashback. It's the other person that have to caution him or herself to not bring such words to that person because I don't know how that can be. Like it's just the other person to caution him. I think that's the best way. Honestly speaking, Mrs. Kayla. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kayla, for the insight, Mrs. Kayla. And lastly, Mrs. Kayla, there's a question I normally ask during the end of the show, Mrs. Kayla. From our forefathers, from our fathers who have passed on during the historic time, there are a lot of beautiful things that do exist during that time. I know from experience, there are a lot of beautiful things that do exist. And a lot of it are missing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, Mrs. Kayla, what do you think that thing will be, Kayla?
Um, well, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I think maybe more of the intentionality of spending time with your partners. I think these days with phones and social media and all of that stuff, it really impacts the time that we have with our partners, or I guess impacts how present we are during that time. And so, if that would be the one thing I think for people to be able to have a little bit more engaged time together.
And that is the only way the communication can develop, honestly speaking. Because if there's no emotional
You got
connection,
to be communicating.
Exactly. The communicate that's the only way the communication can continue to come up. One-on-one communication is very important. Not always phone. That's when develop the communication. I completely agree with you with that. We are battling community now. We're even battling relationship that is having a lot of disconnection when it comes to this phone and stuff like that. We hope the world heal. Honestly speaking, we need to bring this back. We need to have this connection and communication that will really help one another, so that we can have a long-term
Yeah.
relationship, so that we can have relationship that lasts, not a relationship that just 2 years off. It's not meant to be like that. During our forefather time, they live longer. They have relationship more longer. We want to have things like that in our time today. I want to also sincerely thank you, Mrs. Kayla. It's not easy. I want to thank you for the time, for the opportunity, for bringing this experience. This thing is very important in our everyday life. These are the things that we need to know. Most of the people, a lot of people are in relationship because of things like this. Things like this really improves. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kayla, for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Smart. Bye bye.
Bye.